Hi, I'm Rebecca from the blog and YouTube channel Moon and Magnolia, and today I am answering your most asked questions. In 2 weeks, it will be 1 year since Moon and Magnolia launched on YouTube, which is kind of hard to believe actually. And along the way, many of you have asked me questions that I'm going to answer today. Now, I don't have these in any particular order. I'm just going to answer them in the very order that I put them in my spreadsheet. Maybe in my whole life, the number one question I have received that you ask a lot is, what's your favorite book? And here's where things get a little bit weird with me. I mean, there's a lot of things weird with me, but this is one of the top ones. I have a master's degree in English literature. I taught English literature at a North Carolina university. So you'd think that I love every book, but actually having education and experience in that discipline kind of makes reading difficult because you see everything with this critical eye. So more often than not, when I read, I'm not enjoying it in the way that I wish that I could, because I feel like I'm kind of analyzing everything and thinking about it more critically than I want to when I read for pleasure. But one way that I sort of circumvent that is by reading books that are kind of dumb. So I've been joking recently that when I finish a book, I just want to feel a little dumber, which is an exaggeration. I don't really want to feel dumber, but I am really seeking out books often that are relaxing, that even if I look at them with a critical eye, there's not much to criticize because it's just pure fun. So sometimes I do read spicy romance. I do like cozy books and cozy romances and even sometimes cozy mysteries because they just help my brain settle down a little bit, which I often need a lot of help with. But one book that is not necessarily going to make you feel a lot better, but I think is really important to read is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I finished this recently and it is a great book. So the other way that I determine my quote favorite books is not only how it makes me feel at the end, but whether or not I think the story is important. And this is an important one because it highlights the stories of the women who served as nurses during the Vietnam War. Now, I would not have picked this book for myself necessarily. I have a friend who recommended that I read it. I told her no, and then she left a copy on my porch, so I felt obligated to, and it was excellent. So I think this is an important book to read. So this is in one of my top books right now. And then anything that's easy and chill that can just help me relax is also in the top right now too. Do you ever see yourself living on a homestead or a farm? This is a good question. I have spent most of my life in some state of existential crisis. And my current crisis right now is, am I a suburbs city person or do I want land? Because the problem is I want both, right? I want a lot of land for gardening, but I also really like all the things that cities and towns have to offer because I love theater. I'm a huge lover of dance. I danced my whole life up until a foot injury a few years ago. So I like being able to go to the theater and see dance and shows. I like being able to shop and have access to good restaurants and food, but I also like space and quiet and the ability to grow my own food too. So I don't know, there's no place for me in this world right now. So I don't know if I actually ever see myself living on a homestead or a farm because I've never actually lived that far out in the country. So I grew up in a small town in Western Maryland, but we were still 45 minutes from DC and Baltimore and a really quick train ride to Manhattan. And I don't know if I'm really cut out for the true homestead and farm life. It is not beyond me that is a ton of hard physical work. And funny story, if you live on a homestead or a farm, you're probably gonna roll your eyes at me for this one. But my daughter was invited to a birthday party at a farm nearby and I took her and I was scared of all the animals. So look, the goat kept butting the fence. I was butted by a goat when I was a small child. It was a terrifying experience. I don't know how to handle these animals. I'm sure if I learned the skills, I'd be great. But at this moment in time, I don't know if I'm really cut out for living on a true homestead or farm. But what I want to emphasize is that even though I don't have a homestead, I don't have a farm, that these principles are applicable to all of us, that we can take parts of these and apply them to our lives in ways that are meaningful and that simplify our day to day. And that's one of the main things I hope to share with you through my blog and YouTube channel. How's your garden doing? It's not. So if you have been following Moon and Magnolia for the last few months, you know that we revamped our garden and it has been a journey. So my garden right now is maybe the worst my garden's ever been, and that is for a few reasons. One, we tripled the size of our garden, so we planted a lot more stuff than what we're used to dealing with. And I think we made some missteps along the way. In fact, I do have a gardening mistake video that I filmed a number of months ago. I'll leave that in the description box below for you. And I just share some of the mistakes that we made when we were getting our garden going for the season. But also, we have had the most challenging summer here in North Carolina. It started off with a drought and extreme heat. The first day of summer, it was well over 90 degrees with the heat index in the triple digits, and then it didn't rain for months. And then once the weather finally cooled off a little bit, we had a tropical storm, which flooded my garden. It's completely saturated. Some of my plants that were actually doing really well all drowned. So things are not going well. But that's why we have grocery stores, because if we can't grow our own food, we can just buy some. My peppers are doing okay. There are a few things that we can get out of there, but what I think I'm going to do soon is take everything out and prep it for my fall garden. And I think moving forward, I am going to try to nurture a fall and winter garden more than my summer garden, because summers are really challenging here on the coast of North Carolina. The other thing that wrecked my garden was bugs. We have big bug problems. I did all sorts of things to organically mitigate the bug issue. I vacuumed them. I planted marigolds, basil, all sorts of things, but I could not get rid of the leaf-footed bugs, and the grasshoppers were a problem. So it's just been a gardening year for the books, and not necessarily in a good way. But this is also part of gardening. You have good years and you have bad years. You make mistakes and you learn. So I'm hopeful that moving forward, we will have some better garden seasons. Why did you start a YouTube channel and a blog? Why not? So I posted a video about this not too long ago. I think it was called From Professor to Homemaker, that shares the story of my transition from teaching English at a university and hopefully getting a PhD to moving into staying home full time and creating homemaking content. I'll leave that in the description box below, but the main reason why I started a YouTube and a blog is because I know that there are many women and mothers and people out there like me who found themselves in the homemaker position, not necessarily because that was like the dream that they always had, because that's where they landed. And I also know that there are a lot of women and mothers out there who actually don't stay home and who aren't homemakers. But what maybe we have in common is that we want to have a more simplified life, and we want to have scratch-made food, and we want to have gardens and preserve food and do these things, but we feel that maybe we aren't trained for it, or we don't have the time, or that that lifestyle was made for someone else, not us. But I know that isn't true. I know that you can have a simple life and preserve food and cook from scratch and make sourdough, even if it feels like you can't. So I started my YouTube channel and my blog for women, mothers, homemakers, especially those who feel like they don't fit into, quote, the simple life vibe, as a way to let them know that you can have that life, that you can make food from scratch, you can have sourdough, and you can preserve things, and you can do it in the life that you already have. I think that we live our lives sometimes in this like, if my life were different, that's for somebody else. I will do that later when I have more time, but I believe that we can do these things right now. My tagline on my website is always, no matter who you are, where you live, or what you do. And I believe that no matter who you are, where you live, or what you do, you can have this simple lifestyle if that is what you want. The trick is just knowing how to integrate it into your days, and that is what I hope to share with you through my YouTube channel and my blog. Are you going to offer any gluten-free recipes? Probably not, and here is why. I am not gluten-free. In fact, I love gluten. I eat tons of gluten. Gluten does not bother me. So I don't eat gluten-free recipes or gluten-free breads that often, so I don't really feel like I am qualified to put out gluten-free recipes. But here's what's cool about sourdough. So sourdough, which if you have been following Moon and Magnolia for a while, you probably know I have lots of sourdough recipes on YouTube and my blog. it actually can be a good choice for people who are gluten intolerant, not people who have celiac disease. And that is because when the flour and the grains undergo the bulk fermentation, the yeast and the bacteria pre-digest those grains. So it makes it more digestible and tolerable for people who have gluten sensitivities. But again, that is not the case if you have celiac disease. So it's a really cool option for people who have a gluten intolerance, but I always want to remind you that I am not a healthcare provider, I'm not a food scientist, I'm not a nutritionist. So you should check with your healthcare provider to see if gluten products are a good choice for you. But with that said, right now, I don't foresee putting out any gluten-free bread recipes, but sometimes on YouTube and especially on my blog, I do have recipes that just happen to be gluten-free. So for example, I just put out a Instant Pot millet recipe on my blog. Millet is a great pasta substitute for people who avoid gluten because it's a whole grain, but it does not have gluten in it. So sometimes I do offer things like that, but in terms of like creating and testing and making new bread recipes, right now, I don't foresee putting out any gluten-free recipes. However, I will leave some links in the description box below for you of blogs and resources that offer some really great gluten-free sourdough recipes. Why did you start preserving food? So we started preserving some of our own food about a year ago because we were having just some general digestive problems, a lot of heartburn and reflux and that sort of stuff. My husband really noticed that when he eats canned tomatoes, for example, he gets a lot of heartburn. So I decided to start making some of my own tomato products and other foods from scratch, and I realized we were feeling better. But all the food that I was making was local, either from my garden or from a farmer's market. And I realized pretty quickly, we need to figure out a way to have this all year long, even when this stuff isn't in season. So that led me to start canning some peaches for my daughter's snacks. And then I started canning tomatoes to make sure we had plenty of tomato products for the year, which then turned into dehydrating things and buying a freeze dryer and like all these different things to preserve food. And along the way, it turned into just the way that we want to live our lives. Now, I don't preserve everything. I don't stockpile. I'm not a prepper. I just preserve our favorite foods that I can get my hands on either from the garden or from our local farmer's market. Or if I find like a really good deal on something at the grocery store, I will preserve those foods as frequently as possible. But we do live in the suburbs. So I know I often talk about my suburban homesteadish life, but that is because we only have 1/8 of an acre of land. I don't have a homestead pantry or cellar. So even if I wanted to preserve every single thing that we eat, I don't have the space to store it. So I really limit it to things that we love and that we enjoy and that we will use up within a year. Are you currently teaching English? I am not. So I started teaching English in 2008 part-time, then I moved into full-time teaching role, and then I transitioned back to part-time. And currently I am not teaching English. For a while I did teach online, which was nice because it offered some flexibility, but I really wanted the space to be able to serve this community and grow this community. So right now I am not teaching English at all. Sometimes I do miss the university vibes though, because those college students, they'll keep you young. I'll be 42 in like a month. I don't even know how I got here. But you know, when you're around young people, they keep you in the loop about like fashion and songs and celebrities and like what's happening in pop culture. I don't know anything anymore. So not that I've like ever been like the pinnacle of coolness, but I'm like rock bottom cool right now. How much food do you actually make from scratch? I try to make about 80% of my family's food from scratch. I'm a really big believer in balance. If I could make 100% of my family's food from scratch, I would, but the reality is I just can't get it done all the time. So I am no stranger to the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. I am no stranger to Subway. I am no stranger to those sorts of things. I do avoid frozen processed foods. Sometimes we'll keep a few of those things around, like my husband and my child really like frozen fish sticks. I don't like anything that comes from the ocean like that. I don't like fish. I don't like the way they look. I don't like the way they taste. I don't eat any of that. So sometimes we have like frozen products like that around. But generally, if we're going to have food that I didn't cook, I just rather go to a restaurant. So we do eat at restaurants sometimes, but I do try to make about 80% of my family's food from scratch. One way that helps with that is by making a lot of stuff in advance. So a lot of my sourdough bread, I slice and freeze. I do make a few freezer meals or chicken marinades. I actually just put out I think it was the Sunday reset video. I'll link that in the description box below, where I made some chicken marinades and then I just throw them in the Instant Pot from frozen and cook them. So I try to find ways to work around all the effort of scratch cooking and get stuff done in advance that we can make really easily on a busy weeknight. When I have more time, I might do a little more than 80% of our food from scratch. Sometimes I do make our own pasta and then I will put some in the freezer. Lately, I've been making a lot of pasta just out of a box, from the store. So I try to maintain some sort of balance, but I set the goal to make 80% of our family's food from scratch. Now, 100% of our bread products, with the exception of tortillas, I do buy tortillas because your girl doesn't have time to roll those out right now. I do make completely from scratch and sourdough. So that is sort of like my one thing. I set a goal last year to make 100% of my family's bread from scratch, which so far I have done with the exception of tortillas. Do you have a favorite sourdough hack? I do. So if you've been watching Moon and Magnolia for a while, you have probably heard me say this 1,000 times and you're sick of it. A proofing box is a busy baker's best friend. So I use the Bruden Taylor proofing box. I will leave a link for that in the description box below. And this thing is awesome. What it does is you can adjust the temperature higher so you can speed up the process of your bulk fermentation. So that way, if your space is cold or if you need your bulk fermentation to be done at a certain time, you can time it more accurately. I do want to clarify one thing though about the Bruden Taylor. I've talked a lot about dropping the temperature to slow things down. And someone left a really helpful comment on one of my videos to clarify that you can't actually cool the proofing box. So it really stays around room temperature. So this is best if you're trying to keep it warmer. And I have not done a great job explaining that. So I do want to thank the person who left that comment. If you're watching this video, good looking out for this community, because that was a really helpful tip. I recently shared a video called Sourdough and the Daily Grind, and it is full of tips for hacking your sourdough routine so that way you can fit it into a busy schedule. So the Bruden Taylor proofing box is one of the tips I mentioned in that video, but I have a whole bunch of other ways that you can make sourdough bread easier and more realistic for your lifestyle. So check out the description box below for that link. How often do you bake sourdough? That's a kind of a loaded or a weird question for me. If I'm actually baking for my family, I only bake about once a week, but I actually bake a lot more than that because I'm often baking for pictures for my blog or baking to film tutorials for YouTube. So sometimes I'm actually baking like 2 or 3 times a week, and we don't really need that much food. It's just the 3 of us, and one of us is 3 years old. So we don't actually need like 3 loaves of bread a week. So what I do if I have extras is I slice it and I separate with parchment paper and put it in a freezer bag and throw it in the freezer. So that way it doesn't go to waste. But generally during seasons where I'm not filming or creating content for my blog that revolves around baking, I bake about once a week. That's about enough for our family. And sometimes even then that's a little bit too much. So if I have extras when I bake once a week, I'll turn that into breadcrumbs or freeze it, make croutons, something like that. Okay, so those are sort of my candid answers to your burning questions. To stay in the loop with all of the Moon and Magnolia happenings, make sure to subscribe to the email list where you'll never miss a recipe, post, or a video. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below. Also, if you want to start a sourdough journey and you don't know where to begin, a great launching point is my simple guide to making and using sourdough starter ebook. It is completely free. It's 30+ pages of how to make a sourdough starter, making your first loaf of bread, sourdough discard recipes, and learning how to care for your starter. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below. Thank you so much for stopping by today and listening to the answers to these questions. If you have more questions, drop them in the comments below because I start to compile these things, and in time I put together, like this one, a full video of Q&A so we can get to know each other a little bit better. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you again next time.